And video 2 for week 3 is on the categories of religion. Here's a definition of religion, a very simple one: the belief in and engagement with the supernatural. This is a very vague definition that, again, is useful for our purposes in this discussion. But if you've taken a religious studies class, you'll probably agree with me that it's a very inadequate definition. We could make it much more complex and more specific. But let's take this as our definition for now. And first, I want to tell you about, give you some terms of categorization of different religious beliefs and practices. These come from E.B. Tylor, who was a contemporary of Lewis Henry Morgan and another social evolutionist. So remind yourselves what a social evolutionist is. Social evolution was a set of theories that basically talked about how human societies are evolving from savagery to barbarianism to civilization. And again, it's a progressive theory, but it doesn't necessarily have any concept of race tied to it. We're all the same human. We all have the same mind. We're all perfectly capable of getting to civilization given enough time. So remember that in this discussion. So this is Tylor's social evolution of religion, if you will. The first is animatism, a belief in nebulous and impersonal powers or forces. So we can look at the religious beliefs of the Junhuanzi and Nur as examples of these. Not very well-defined sense of actual spirits or actual personalities, but more of a kind of an understanding that there are nebulous and impersonal powers out there who might be affecting human life in certain ways. But in animatism, there's certainly no religious clergy. There are no texts set down that people read and memorize. Nothing like that. No formality at all. Just this rather vague set of beliefs. Animism is kind of one step beyond animatism in defining something specific. So this is a belief that spirits, actual spirits and personalities inhabit or live in nature and in inanimate objects. So now we have that rather than an impersonal power or force, we have an actual defined spirit who lives in a tree or lives in a rock or is inhabiting a volcano or something like that. You'll see an example of some animist beliefs in your film for this week on Umbanda, which is a religion practice mostly in Brazil. So make sure you understand the difference between animatism and animism, and if you don't, we can talk about that on Thursday. Then there's polytheism, belief in multiple beings or gods that are distinct from the natural world. So now we're moving out of animism, which inhabits these spirits in nature, and making those beings or gods that are distinct from nature. So there are multiple spirits or gods or beings out there, and we can interact with them more directly rather than indirectly through nature. Finally, there's monotheism, the belief in a single deity. And we tend to think of the three great monotheistic religions as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There's also Zoroastrianism and some other religions that we could name, but those are the big three. And so you can see the social evolution here. E.B. Tylor and others would have put animatism and animism at the level of savagery, polytheism at the level of barbarism, and monotheism, which coincidentally was what was mostly practiced by religious people in the West, as the mark of civilization. And what's interesting is Tylor talked about another category beyond monotheism: science. Tylor was a religious man himself, and he believed in his religion, but he felt that science would eventually replace religion. We would sort of evolve to use science to make sense of our world. And religion would be a private set of beliefs, but our kind of public understanding of how the world works would be through science. Okay, so He believed monotheism was the mark of civilization, but humanity was actually evolving beyond that. Oops. Okay, I don't want to get there quite yet. Okay, so even though these categories are associated with social evolution, which has pretty much fallen out of favor in anthropology officially, we still think about these as different categories of complexity that sort of bring together different beliefs and practices. Now, religion is one of the hardest areas for anthropologists to study and understand. And let's think about why that might be. So, religion is an interesting place where beliefs and knowledge come together, kind of, we could say, in the opposite way from what we might expect. So when we talked about the difference between belief and knowledge, generally speaking, you could see that from the Edic perspective, knowledge is kind of seen as having a higher value than belief. Belief is something that people in a culture kind of believe because they have faith, whatever, but they haven't, they haven't proven logically that these beliefs are actually knowledge. But in religion, it's almost like belief is elevated above knowledge. So, for example, I'll just go ahead and tell you, I am a devout Christian. And to me, part of my devoutness is the fact that I can't prove any of it. I have to have faith in my beliefs, and that's what makes them more real to me. I would say that if we could just easily go out and prove everything there is to know about God and Jesus and whatever else, then it would kind of lose some of its power. It's faith that gives it power. And because of that, think about how difficult it is for anthropologists to study religion, because many anthropologists don't share the faith of the people that they're studying. It might surprise you to know that anthropology is the most secular field of all the disciplines in terms of the actual religious belief of anthropologists. So we find that, contrary to what you might expect, there are more religious people among hard scientists than there are among social scientists. Social scientists and humanists, generally speaking, tend to be less religious than hard scientists. And among the social scientists and humanists, anthropologists are the most secular. The vast majority of anthropologists are atheists or agnostic. So imagine the difficulty of someone who doesn't believe in religion being able to understand faith from within, when faith is not something that can be proven easily through empiricism, positivism, and reason. And that sets up a really interesting set of questions that we can ask about religion. For example, can an anthropologist who doesn't share the religious beliefs of the people he is studying really do justice to them? Is it easier for an anthropologist who is religious to study another religion? Or does the fact that that person is religious sort of get in the way of understanding another religion? Just from my own experience, I could share that being in a Muslim society in Morocco, it actually helped that I was Christian, because for Muslims, Judaism and Christianity are they're also considered religions of the book. Like, they share the same basic text and the same basic God. It's just that Jews and Christians kind of got some important stuff wrong. So Muhammad, or God, had to reveal the text again through Muhammad and get it right, make sure that people understood it correctly for the final time. So for Muslims I met in Morocco, they were much more comfortable talking about Islam with me because they saw me as something of a co-religionist than they would be discussing Islam with someone who said, "Oh, I'm an atheist. I don't have any religious belief at all." Okay, so there are a couple of interesting things to think about in terms of religion and being an anthropologist, and to what extent an anthropologist can understand something that is based so much on faith. One last thing to discuss about religion is the issue of syncretism or hybridity. Syncretism is an older word in anthropology that refers to the adaptation of a combination of different cultural traits, such as that expressed in many religious beliefs and practices. You'll see a lot of examples of this in the film about Umbanda, which really sort of merges Christianity with indigenous religions, with African religions that were brought to Brazil by enslaved peoples. So syncretism was the word. A more updated word is hybridity, which many scholars think is a better term because it's sort of, the emphasis is on this like mixing, maybe a more equal mixing of different aspects of religion. But overall, both terms are seen as problematic by many people who study religion because it leads to a contrast, a binary between certain religions that are seen as pure and other religions that are seen as syncretic. So when you watch the film Umbanda, you might find that there's a tendency to explain Umbanda as syncretic or hybrid as against Christianity, which is pure. But for people who don't like this way of thinking, they argue that no religion is pure. Christianity, in fact, is syncretic and hybrid. It adapts all kinds of pagan beliefs that were present in the Middle East before Christianity came into being. It certainly adapts elements of Judaism. So there is no pure Christianity to sort of contrast with this hybrid religion called Umbanda. So that's just something to keep in mind. That debate is something to keep in mind as you watch the film and as we discuss religion, syncretism, and hybridity on Wednesday and Thursday.